Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Geek Centurions, and we're here to talk about She-Hulk. It's me, your boy Eli.
See Joe.
And as I said, we're talking about the first episode of She-Hulk that just released today, and it's interesting. Not terrible. I think it has an interesting. You know what it feels like? It feels like, and I'll explain this as we go along. It feels like a quick rundown of a pilot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I get what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
Mean by that, because yeah, the whole this whole episode is just more or less just explaining who Jennifer Walters is,
What's her relationship with
Bruce Banner,
mm-hmm.
how she becomes a Hulk,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and all that stuff. And yeah, I definitely get what you mean by it has a very sort of pilot kind of feeling to it because it does seem to like set up a lot of like sort of those dynamics between Bruce and Jen, as well as just like what makes her what makes She-Hulk different from Hulk besides the obvious gender difference.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um,
Yes, because like, and this is actually to its benefit. If you don't know who She-Hulk is, if you're like a fan of the movies and never read a comic book, only heard like She-Hulk in passing, and only know that this is her cousin, this is Hulk's cousin. You don't know much about her.
mm-hmm.
Here it's like, oh no, she's a lawyer. She's funny. She can break the fourth wall, which I feel like if you didn't know would feel very weird because like if you know your history of Marvel characters, She-Hulk was technically like the first Deadpool.
Yeah, like she was in terms of like she was the first one to like straight up like break the fourth wall in a lot of Marvel comics.
Yeah, if you look up into the history of I can't remember the name of the writer, but his run on She-Hulk is probably one of the most definitive runs on She-Hulk of the She-Hulk. It's kind of funny because she often would like, and this is how fourth wall breaky she was. She would literally be like, "Hey, let's say the writer was you, right? Like Joe." It's like, "Hey Joe, what the fuck is this?" Like she would literally say, "Like, are you serious? Are we doing this?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, that's what I wrote." And that's the kind of comedy it would
Mm-hmm.
be. I don't think they're gonna go that far in. That would be pretty funny.
It seems to take a bit more of a style of like something like Jim from The Office, I guess. Whenever he looks into the camera, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It has that kind of same energy. Like she kind of looks into the camera. I mean, initially, like she sort of explains like the backstory of like, oh yeah, I'm a Hulk. Let's get the rundown. Let me explain to you guys. But clearly, because so I assume some people are like, okay, so she's just gonna explain it to us, and then like, no, there's other scenes where we're just like looking at the camera, being like, oh yeah, he doesn't really mean that,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So it's a yeah, I think it is like probably one of the more interesting things, and I always assume it might be like a little bit like a test, if you will, if and when Deadpool does show up into the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
That's so for people who don't keep up with Deadpool and stuff, be like, oh okay, like you have some more breaking the fourth wall stuff here. But yeah, I think this first episode, I think it's solid.
Yeah. I don't think it's terrible. I do think some decisions on it are very questionable. But then again, like there are times where I've come to really like some aspects of. This has been me for a lot of the Disney Plus shows. There are aspects that I really like about it, and there's aspects I don't really like about it. This one, for the aspects I don't like, it's just how quick we are with it. The pacing's really quick, especially in this first episode. But the setting, the idea of Jennifer Walters, her issues are plainly stated, and we totally understand where that's coming from. And considering who She-Hulk is, and kind of like one of the meanings behind She-Hulk for a lot of people, it kind of makes sense. Like for one of the things that a lot of people tend to talk about, like what She-Hulk tends to mean for them, is this sort of like awakening to womanhood kind of idea. Because Jennifer Walters in the comics, early in the comics, it was this idea that she's kind of like very timid, very meek, kind of like doesn't really have much confidence with herself. But when she becomes She-Hulk, she just becomes this confident, sexy, Amazonian woman.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see the inklings of that really in this first episode, the beginnings of that sort of idea setting, planting the seeds, as you will.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm really looking forward to. Also, we just talked about how she's kind of the first Deadpool. She's also kind of one of the more comedic characters.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely, I think the show is definitely going to be leaning into sort of the comedy aspect.
Mm-hmm. It's very cheesy.
Yeah.
Like, there's some moments like, why did that happen? Well, because fuck, why not?
Yeah.
That's like, there's a moment like, okay, this feels very like She-Hulk, like early She-Hulk, where like something random would just happen like that, and I'm like, yeah, no, Jennifer Walters, that would happen. But also just like there's like an ongoing joke that even the fandom kind of questions. Like it's a joke towards like fans, not like a mean joke, but like a joke that fans would have conversations about.
Yeah, like those like it feels like one of those film theory videos of like, they didn't have anything else to do that day, and like, hey, isn't it kind of like weird that this person probably like it's like a whole weird like theory of like doing stuff.
Yeah, it's like something that that you heard inklings on on the internet, like people making fun of like characters and this and that, and then like they address it and they do it in such a funny way. It's like, we're acknowledging that joke.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I won't lie, I don't think I ever like I guess it's one of those things that like, it's sort of like, huh, when you think about it, yeah, it is kind of something that like you don't think about.
Yeah,
it's like in the background, and then you like when someone brings attention to it, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess it is kind of weird, huh?
yeah, and like they clarify it with the even more funnier joke.
Well, yeah, they bring it all because they more or less start the episode with that joke, and then they end it with like a little like after credits little stinger of like just like finishing the joke essentially. But yeah, I think the CGI for the most part works fairly well. Because I think I remember some people having at least a bit of issues, at least when they were seeing the trailers of like how She-Hulk was looking. But I think
here she looks fine. I think the problem is, and this is just for me, like it's the shade of green they gave her.
Yeah, I think that's kind of that might be it.
Yeah, because like it sometimes, like when you see someone paint themselves green, it just looks really wrong.
Yeah.
And like it, depending on what kind of shade they are, also in contrast with the skin tone, it works. But like for Jen Walters, the skin tone they went with feels very weird.
It's kind of interesting because when you look at the credit sequence, it's just a bunch of She-Hulk, doing all their lawyer stuff or whatever. Like that kind of shading of green works in those like after credit scene or the credit scenes. I think it's just more like it might just be one of those things where like she kind of just looks a little bit better like drawn in art than in like a CG setting.
It's one of those things where it looks better on paper than it does on film.
Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of neat to have Mark Ruffalo be in the show.
Well, yeah, and just like, and this is what I mean, like further acknowledging how different they are. If you didn't know who She-Hulk, yeah, she's a Hulk, but she's got more control over it than Bruce.
Yeah,
because, yeah, I'll let you go.
No, because like they more like obviously like we've seen like Bruce and the Hulk constantly. It's a battle of personalities essentially. But in this episode, it's very clearly like like Bruce is trying to like get her up to speed and like trying to like make sure she can control both sides, and it's very like it comes like a bit more naturally to her. Like he's like Like there aren't like two different guys trying to battle out for positions. Like no, I think it's just all me. You know?
Which you could do some reading into that.
Yeah, I mean to be fair, like when you look into the Hulk and his origins.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
You know, like there's a lot of like reason as to why he is.
There's a reason why the Hulk persona is very childlike. There's a reason why there's so many different like iterations of Hulk, and it's because for Bruce, it's sort of past trauma, and it's one of the things where I feel like a lot of people tend to forget about the Hulk and some things that the movies have not done well, and I totally understand why, because it's just how do you do that in film, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't. I'm not saying you can't, but it's like how do you do that while acknowledging the fact that your childhood trauma is a giant green monster.
Yeah, like I mean,
not doing like it in a horror sense.
Yeah, because I mean, like the Ang Lee Hulk, it definitely attempts that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's one of the things I'm like. I look back at Ang Lee Hulk, and it's a bad movie, but like it tried, and it actually addressed the issues of Bruce, his trauma with his father, the abuse he had as a child, the death of his mother, and while it doesn't happen in that movie, the fact that in some cases Bruce is responsible for the death of his father. Like there's a reason why Bruce Banner is very like kind of like reserved and meek himself because of past traumas and abuse of other people. And so obviously that's why the Hulk is like a representation of all that rage he has, all the pent up rage that he has. What do you say? Be jealous here, this or that. But there's different iterations of Hulk within like the psyche of Banner that take form. That's why you have Joe Fixit, who is like the more confident, like the arrogant version of himself.
Yeah.
Who is also a mobster.
Which that's.
And if you don't know who Joe Fixit is, that's Grey Hulk, buddy.
Yeah, like that was always like the interesting thing. If anything, like Grey Hulk was like the original, I guess, smart Hulk that they sort of like portrayed.
But he was also the weakest.
Yeah, because he obviously he had more intellect and like, yeah, he was still like Hulk sized, but it was all in his brain at this point, right?
Yeah, he was smart, but he was also very arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a reason why he was a mobster. And with Jen Walters, you don't really have that. She doesn't have, the childhood past traumas, but she does have issues of her own, and it's addressed in this show with her issues as, being a woman, which is, for some might be like a little too overhanded, but I think that kind of gets to the point why she kind of has to keep herself in check.
Yeah, like, and I think it is like, I guess you could maybe read into it more of like, and maybe that's sort of the reason why she's able to control her Hulk self better.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because she's always been like, maintaining like her anger. Because if for a woman to get angry, it's a lot different for a man. Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I don't think they're gonna go that
deep into it.
I think they'll go into some level of it, but they're not gonna go too deep because like I feel like. One, like, I don't know how long Mark Ruffalo's going to be in this, because I feel like this is just the one episode deal with him. But it's also just like one of those things where like, hey, this is something women go through. Because let's face it, if a woman starts yelling, we all consider her crazy or Karen.
Yeah. And that's especially in a professional setting, right?
Yeah.
Like she wants to be a lawyer, wants to get taken seriously, and that sort of thing.
Which they already set up like, she ain't taking that seriously.
Yeah, it's like, well,
because like there's a moment where like they're like she's getting ready for her, was it the speech before the end of the trial?
Her closing arguments.
Her closing arguments. The dude's saying some stuff, and like. There's I can't remember everything he said, but the one thing he really says, like, make sure you smile. And it's like, oh, dude, no, don't say that. And like, because that's a thing that
yeah. It's a very like it's a bit sexist, right?
Yeah.
It's
like because it goes back to like the whole. We're not gonna go deep into Captain the issue the problems that Captain Marvel had to face before that movie came out. It's like because like there was an issue where like, oh, she doesn't smile in any of her photos. She should smile more. It's like, I mean, Steve, Iron Man, everyone else isn't smiling. Why does she gotta smile?
Yeah, like she's she's got her serious game on.
Yeah.
She has to save the world and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a little interesting.
Unless she's like a fucking Goku or Luffy who's gotta put a smile on. But then again, when you see Goku or Luffy get serious, it's like, oh shit.
Yeah, that's the juxtaposition,
Yeah. But that's a totally different story. Yeah. But no, I think this show has a lot of like good ideas going with, but I feel like there's also like a lot of execution issues that I have issues. But I think so far this is just a very solid first episode. I think that there's a lot of like hope to make things better, and obviously we are gonna get Daredevil, Abomination, and some other characters who are supposedly coming in along.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about your expectations for those guys, or?
I mean, I don't know, because I have heard that Daredevil, because I think some people are like, oh, Daredevil's only going to show up in the last episode, blah, blah, blah. But I have heard that he actually is going to play at least, not like a huge role, but like, he will have a role throughout the series. Which makes sense to me because, one, lawyer.
Yeah, they're both lawyers.
So, we could potentially see them, like, hanging out or whatever, which would be kind of interesting. But yeah, like I think it's like, I guess what's I find more interesting is that we're getting Abomination back, and he looks more like the Abomination from the comics, which I always found to be kind of interesting. Like, but yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna be because
I've heard a lot of people having complaints about they made him too funny, and to which I respond, have you ever read a She-Hulk comic?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I think when most people like make, I guess, criticisms about She-Hulk, or that I think at least from this show, I think it's definitely people who probably don't know that much about She-Hulk. There's probably gonna be at least one or two like friggin' takes on the internet being like, I can't believe they made a female Hulk, and it's like, dude, She-Hulk's been around since like at least the 60s.
Yeah.
So don't try to think that this is like a new thing. Like, She-Hulk's is honestly a fairly popular character, honestly.
She's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, like,
she's annoying to fight sometimes in Marvel 3.
I mean, yeah. Although I do like the back and forth she has with Deadpool in that game.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not the only one that break before fall. Wade. Yeah.
Okay, that did happen.
Yeah, but
well, also just like, so if you ever read comics, right, specifically Marvel, they tend to jump around on the serious and the comedy a lot. It's just who they are. Like, you would face like a very like serious noted storyline with a character, and then then there's a story with that character doing some jokes or being funny. I think like one of the best examples of that is Daredevil, surprisingly. Because there was a run where like Daredevil was happy, and a lot of people were like, "Why is he happy? He's not supposed to be happy. He's Daredevil. He's supposed to be like guilt ridden and stuff." But like, no, he can be happy. Dude, what's wrong with him being happy?
It's the same people that I think whenever Peter Parker in like comics is having like, or just in anything, just has like a fun, he's enjoying life. There's like, Peter shouldn't be like this. He should be struggling.
Yeah.
He always has to struggle. That's who Spider-Man is.
Yeah, but it's also like, it's funny because like in that way, in that run by Mark Waid, which I do recommend reading. It's surprisingly really good. It's also like he's just kind of like covering up like some issues he's been going through, which I'm like, yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. Like you're using it in a smart way, which I'm like, which someone said like, oh yeah, but he's still being like, this and that. I'm like, yeah, but he's also being lighthearted. He saves a bus full of blind kids. That's like so wholesome.
I honestly, I think it's just. I think like a lot of people, maybe they don't get that it's okay for characters to have a bit of levity.
Yeah.
You know, like okay for these characters. That definitely seem to have lots of struggles to have at least moments of levity
Mm-hmm.
or calmness, or where
Mm-hmm.
they can just be relaxed and that kind of stuff.
I feel like oftentimes for a lot of people, they tend to forget that comic books aren't written by one person. Well, and like anything from the big two aren't written by the big by one person. They're written by different people who write stuff differently.
I mean, yeah, maybe that's one, but I also feel like if anything, it's more of a there's like a lot of these characters should have moments to take a breath, to slow down, to like this and that, so that when those moments of like say of personal like struggles and all that sort of stuff happen, they're more impactful because it's like what this character is when the situation isn't as suspenseful or this and that, so it gives it more meaning, I guess, whenever those big moments happen, right? So if you give your characters like a bit of downtime, allow them to be at least a bit happy when the moments that where it's like the struggle, this and that, they feel more impactful. I feel because then it's like okay, what these guys are fighting for, when the day comes where they don't have to
Yeah.
be doing this.
Yeah, it's like you have a life. That's fine. That's good. Thank God, kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, like for me, like what I'm saying is that like I could be reading a comic where Batman is doing some edgy shit, and then read a book where he's having to give you an example, like right now Batman's doing some his detective stuff, but then you go to the Superman Batman comic, somehow they do the fusion with Green Lantern's power with Superman, and now he's like Batman Superman saying whatever. This actually happened. I don't know why you're looking at me like that.
I don't. I barely understood half of that. I'm gonna be honest.
Basically, Superman, Batman, with the power of a Green Lantern ring, were able to fuse into one person.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like Dragon Ball Z level shit.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. At the end of the day, I think it's more of like people's perceptions of how these comic book characters are seen. Like, obviously, not everyone's reading comics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for I think a good chunk of the last couple of years, yeah, people see Batman as this dark, brooding guy. But I mean, like, dude fights like some crazy villains, like literally a sand monster or rather a clay monster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I always found it fucking interesting that people are always like Batman. It should always be dark and serious because that's I don't know. I don't know if it's because of the Nolan trilogy and how good The Dark Knight was, and that people are just so fixated on like keeping Batman in that box. But I always found Batman more fun when he does get into some crazy shenanigans every now and again.
Yeah, like he has to fight Joker with some smiling fish.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just I don't know. I don't know if it's just people who feel like it has to be dark and serious so that they themselves feel like they watch serious movies or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think it's just more of like, oh, these you're making fun of these characters, and I'm like, well, but Marvel, both the big two have been doing that for years.
I mean, friggin', I think every franchise eventually just makes fun of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, like Disney, like not talking about Marvel stuff, but like the Disney like movies, like the animated movies have been making fun of themselves for a while. I mean, friggin' Frozen has this whole thing where it's like, you're gonna marry a guy you just met? Isn't that a little too soon? Like a
wink and the nod.
Wink and nod to the camera. It's like, oh, I get it, because you guys did that all the time in the old movies.
Also, it's kind of cringe.
Yeah, a little bit.
See, I was gonna go with like the more recent Mickey Mouse shorts.
Oh yeah, yeah. Those ones I think worked out a little better.
Yeah, because it's like it stops making Mickey the straight man and more of the crazy one.
Yeah, just everyone's a little crazy in that show,
Yeah.
in those shorts. Yeah. So I don't know. It's to me, I think She-Hulk being more comedic is fine because one, it's more true to the character
Mm-hmm.
and her old thing, and I mean, two, I mean, realistically, I mean, the show is more or less about her being a lawyer, and then I guess wanting to make a like a lawyers for superheroes, I guess,
Yeah.
kind of thing. I mean, granted, we don't know what the whole like big overarching thing of She-Hulk seems like it's gonna be, because
It might be just an episodic thing.
yeah, like I mean, Moon Knight definitely like was in its own little bubble essentially.
Yeah.
Even though it is part of the MCU and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which was fine for that show. It
Yeah.
honestly feels like it's fine, like for Moon Knight to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Miss Marvel, definitely like her whole arching thing is mainly more to tie into the upcoming like the Marvels movie.
Yeah, and all this thing involving her powers.
And yeah, the potential of her maybe being a mutant as well, dropping those breadcrumbs in there. And then with She-Hulk, it's gonna be, I don't know, it's gonna be interesting where it all sort of.
I think it's just best to like. This is just me, right? Where you just keep them in their own sort of thing, and then like bringing them on because you've rewatched some of the Marvel movies recently, and some of the movies that worked the best are the ones that didn't tie to anything. Just having them be like their own little thing.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's sort of like, not to say that it's a bad thing to have
Interconnectivity.
Yeah, because I mean that's kind of what Marvel. That's the whole point of the MCU in a sense.
It's what made them the most popular thing ever.
But I think it was always the main thing is that you don't necessarily have to watch everything to get everything, right? Like you don't need to watch every single movie before the first Avengers to get why this is happening. You could have just watched Iron Man 1 and 2, and then you can like, because that movie definitely sets up at least all the other like main characters well enough to where you can kind of get what's going on, what their whole deal is. And that's sort of like, I feel like that was always sort of the approach I think Marvel has done, and I think should continue to do, of just like, because I know some people like some people's main issue with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness was like they felt it was a bit of a Wanda's whole direction felt a bit of like a heel turn, but if you watched Wanda Vision, it makes a bit more sense. That's probably maybe like the first time I think where it feels like, okay, I need to watch this Disney Plus show to understand the motivations of what's happening with Wanda in the Multiverse of Madness. Okay. I feel like that's maybe the first time we've probably seen something like that in the Marvel Universe, which in the MCU, which, to be fair, like 10 years, essentially, because it started in 2008, like it took more than 10 years for that to finally happen, where it feels like, okay, maybe, we can do a thing of having a character, or rather like having things set up, and then like maybe people will have to go watch this thing to get what's going on. And even then, I feel like when you watch Doctor Strange, like you can like her motivations are pretty clear, pretty laid out anyway. It's just that I think WandaVision makes it more like coherent, I guess, for some people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's always been Marvel's sort of thing of just like, not necessarily like everything is setting up to the next big event, but more sort of like,
yeah. And I feel like we've kind of like talked to this to the end, where like they kind of need to either slow down or just like try to make more standalone stories again. But that's to each their own, really. It's a hope they do, but listen to us a bit. I mean, I don't know. But but right now for like She-Hulk, it feels like it's gonna be like a standalone thing. But I will say, I like how Hulk tries to be like, you gotta be a superhero now. I was like, I don't want to be a superhero. I'm a goddamn lawyer. And like, if you know anything about She-Hulk, she's gonna be doing some superheroing. Gonna...
Bueno.
Hola, chico.
Hey, Ma.
¿Cómo estás?
Bien.
¿Qué comiste?
Just bimbo.
Ok, ahí está la cena para las quesadillas.
Okay.
Órale, pues. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, like that's always. I won't lie. That's actually kind of one of the interesting things with She-Hulk. At least in this episode where it's like Bruce's whole thing is like, all right, I got to train you to be a superhero, all right? Because because he's very much like, listen, we doing a whole great power, great responsibility thing with her, right? Where it's like, like we're the ones that are gonna have to like when something goes down, we have to like protect people, all right?
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, so no, I agree with you. Hey man, like, do you gotta do really? The situation will come up, and then actually, it came up at the end of the episode.
I mean, yeah, because obviously, it definitely, that end of the episode, you gotta get one last big action moment, and it shows that like, hey, yeah, all right, I guess I gotta take care of some superhero nonsense, but I'm still gonna lawyer this up, all right? I am here to deliver my closing statement. All right. Let's ignore the fact that I just threw that lady through a wall.
And she just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
For whatever freaking reason.
Yep. I'm here to freaking lawyer this shit up.
Which again, that is such a classic She-Hulk thing to do.
Random scenario happens. She has to clean it up, and it's like, all right, now back to lawyering. What were we doing again? But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think this was a solid episode. And I am at least optimistic of how everything else is going to turn out, honestly.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think it's like I said, this one, aside from the issues that I personally have with some of the direction, but then I mean like shot direction wise, it's fine. I think it has the seeds to grow better, and it's one of those things where like Miss Marvel, right? For me, it started off great and it fizzled down so hard. For this one's like, it's starting okay. Hopefully, like, it maintains at least a solid to maybe a good, even better. But we'll wait and see. But yeah, I think we can wrap it up there. If you guys like what you heard, be sure to follow us on all social medias at the Geek Centurions. We are most active on Instagram at the Geek Centurions. You'll find a link tree to all the podcasts that we're officially part of, like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, and such more things. And you'll find a link to the YouTube for all your other listeners out there who want to put a face to the voice. There you go. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe on there, and be sure to support us in any form with our Patreon. Anyways, guys, you guys have a good one. It's been me, your boy Eli.
It's been me, Joe.
She-Hulk starts off pretty good, and hopefully we'll see more of it. And yeah, you guys have a good one. Peace.